Hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Blackletter Brunch. Um, Julian Waters, the typographer, calligrapher, and um, teacher, is our presenter today. Um, Julian Waters is the son of the revered calligrapher Sheila Waters and leading bookbinder conservator Peter Waters. His other great mentor was the legendary Hermann Zapf. For more than 40 years, Julian taught workshops for lettering professionals worldwide and taught typography, lettering, and font design at institutions including RIT, the Corcoran School of Art, Cooper Union, New York, Letterform Archive, and Wells College. Julian's typography and lettering clients have included U.S. Postal Service, National Geographic, agencies, publishers, and memorials. His typefaces include Adobe Waters Titling Pro, and T.H. Jefferson for Monticello. His work has received many awards and has been widely published and exhibited. If you have questions during the talk, please type them into the chat window. I may hold them until the end, uh, so as not to interrupt the talk too much. But thank you so much, Julian, for giving this talk today about your mother and about your parents. It's quite an honor to have you here today.
Well, thanks so much, Raoul, and thanks everyone for joining. And especially, it's very nice to see some of you are still kicking out there. We're all uh, we're all still trying to get by one way or the other and survive certain times and so on. So, um, I should say one reason why I'm doing this through the Raoul's Blackletter Brunch is because they are archived on YouTube. I did a similar two-part talk for the Washington Calligraphers Guild, but they don't archive. And I think some historical information is good to, so that more people can access these things rather than just keeping them to ourselves and so on. So that's a big reason. And also, I've seen some of the previous ones, and I think it's a great resource. And so I hope more and more people will at least check your channel out on YouTube. Another one, John Prestiani out there. I see you. Hi. Um, I saw your program on Jeannie Wong, and that again, that sort of helped prompt me to want to do it for this one. So, anyway, I'd like to let's get into it. I want to just bring up a couple of artifacts from my childhood and sort of give a flavor. Now, can you see this box that I'm holding in front of me? Nod if you can. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is a box covered, made by my father and his teacher, then bookbinding partner, Roger Powell. It's covered in cockerel marbled paper, and inside are these handmade napkin rings, tooled leather napkin rings. And so I grew up with things like this. There's another artifact here that my parents bought uh, when they were just starting to live together, first married. It's, I think it's a fruit bowl, but this would be from the 50s, I think. But I just love the sort of minimalist, you know, form following function. It's a sort of a mid-century modern form, but I just love certain artifacts that we still have, and that's it. That's all part of, growing up in this family. I think sort of appreciating things that have a function, but also have a beautiful form, and also, that are tactile in some way. And books, of course, are a big part of that. So I would like to get into, let's see, I think I need to share, and I'm going to get right into the program. Get rid of that. Whoops. let's go back. Sorry. Now I want to get rid of uh, something here. Just a sec. Okay. So can you all see that? It says Blackletter Brunch. Um,
Yes, I can
that,
see that. It's in
okay.
full screen mode. Mhm.
Okay, good. So so this part one will be about my parents, their background in England and their first careers in England before we moved to this country at the end of 1971. So they were both around 40 or early 40s when we moved, and they were both really at the height of their careers at that point. And so then moving to this country gave them both a whole different career. And my part two will show quite a bit about how that affected Sheila's work particularly, and her teaching, and how she had a big effect on people, as many of you will witness. So that's where we start. Because this is a blackletter brunch, and I just love blackletter, I can't resist putting a couple of my own blackletter efforts in here. Uh, First of all, there are my parents. I'd say maybe 10 years after we moved over here. So this is when we lived in Gaithersburg, and I had already left home by that time. There I am on the left with some friends. This is towards the end of high school. And I'll just mention a little bit about my beginnings in calligraphy, which didn't start at age 0. It really started around 18, around this age. I won't go into that too much, but this was one of my early efforts. I had been maybe trying with calligraphy maybe about a year or so. And I did this piece. I took the text out of Hermann Zapf's Manuale Typographicum, 1954, that one of those great books that he did. And so I was still very influenced by the English school, especially my mother's work. And I gave this to her for her birthday at the time. And she said, because I would work sort of in secret in my room, and then I might show her something. I wouldn't show my father because I was afraid that he'd think it was terrible. I had to get over that at some point. But he was a big uh, constructive critic of my mother's work all through my life, really up to until he died. But she apparently had a mixture of pride and envy when she saw this, because she was proud that, oh, her eldest son is really getting somewhere with sort of this straightforward calligraphy. But also she said she was envious because it had taken me a lot shorter time than it took her to get to this point. Of course, I had the benefit of growing up with this stuff all around me, which she did not. So it's not really a fair comparison. And we never really compared our work. We always went in different ways. So I want to just mention, from there, after a few years, my work went, I would say, from more writing to more lettering design, so that like some of my friends, John Stevens, Georgia Diva, and others, we were doing a lot of work for art directors, for advertising, for graphic design, for book titles, and so on. And so instead of being somebody who can write the same italic or the same bookhand exactly the same day after day, you have to be more of a chameleon. So, but I think that the foundation that my mother went through, in fact, both parents, as you'll see, it really helped. So I knew a lot of what she went through. And so I could sort of build on that and go into different, more expressive directions. And also studying with Hermann Zapf, as John Prestiani did, and others, that kind of gave me a real insight into what might be possible. There's something about being around that man was so inspiring. And but that's a whole other lecture. So I am interested in various kinds of blackletter. This was from a free study. I made some kind of free copies of some pieces of Johann Neudorfer the Elder, who some consider the father of German Renaissance calligraphy. And kind of uh, one of the people who started early Fraktur, and he worked with Dürer, and that's a whole other lecture as well. But it's something I've looked into a lot, and I was trying to pick up the strokes that he taught, in fact. So I'm exaggerating them here, but this is basically a free copy of one of his things. And there's just a couple more blackletter things of mine. These were alphabets done actually originally just in black, but there was a book after Zapf had died. There's a book produced called Manuale Typographicum, Calligraphicum, and these were alphabets I did for that. Two of them ended up being selected for that. This is one of them. But again, it was printed in letterpress, so it wasn't in two colors. So here we come to my mother Sheila. So the picture on the right is what my parents looked like around 1967 when my father was back from Florence, and I'll mention Florence later on. On the left, this is my mother's drawing of myself and my brother Mike. My youngest brother Christopher wasn't born yet, but there we are while she's trying to work. I'll mention more about that a little bit later. But just to go into her personal history, some of you may know that she lost her father at a very early age, and he died as a result of a terrible car accident. And she was supposed to go for this car ride with her father and two cousins, I think, two or three cousins. And so she did. They all went off in their little car, an Austin 7. And then she decided she would instead stop and go and play with her friend Gladys. So the car stopped. She got out and went to play. And then much later on, she saw a policeman coming to the house, and she thought, "Oh, I must have done something naughty," because she did a lot of naughty things when she was a child. But no, it was the father. The police was telling her mother that about the terrible accident. So my uncle Stuart, Sheila's younger brother, wasn't even born yet, so he never knew his father. So and Stuart is still living. Sheila died in 2022. Stuart is now at least 90, so he's still going. And I have a lot of cousins over in England still. So there's Sheila and the infamous, well, that's not one of the cats, which I'll mention, but there's young Stuart. This is some years after. Now, there's a story here that she actually sold her brother, as some of you, she may have told you this story, but I won't read this out, but you can always take a screenshot or you can check it later. But she essentially, her mother came out into the garden and Stuart was missing. Stuart was in his pram and Sheila wouldn't tell him where she was. So her mother had to go all around the neighborhood knocking on doors saying, "Do you have my baby?" Which was crazy. But she she said, well, I've sold him. And look at these kittens. She sold him for 3 kittens and 3 pennies. So this is Sheila's early creativity coming out. She did a lot of other naughty creative things like painting the family car with house paint, but I won't get into all of those. But anyway, some of you may have heard of some of these things. And apparently she tried to sell him a second time, but was unsuccessful. So some of Sheila's early lettering here, which is quite crazy looking, but she was 12 and never had a lesson. But this was wartime. So both my parents were coming of age during the war. So she was something like age 11 to 16 during the war. And there's an early drawing actually of an art teacher of hers there at age 16. This is a free painting um, done inside a church, and which has great perspective. Again, she's only 16 here. Um, Not no photographs or anything. She's just sitting in the church painting this. So she wanted to be an artist, and she wanted she didn't know about calligraphy until she was exposed to it in art school. I don't need to go into stories about how she started, but you know she joined a class and pretty soon they were looking at manuscripts and being able to copy manuscripts. Her teacher was Maisie Shirley, so this was the Medway College of Art in Kent. Kent being to the east of London. My father grew up in Surrey to the west of London, and we'll get to him later on. But here's some of Sheila's early calligraphy, so you can see she had a lot of room for development from these early things. But you know, they're basically just starting off with a style and then very soon being asked to make pieces. And as she said, she had no understanding of those initials, you know, how you should use initials. But you know, this is very much of that time, what they were exposed to, and Edward Johnston was very influential still through his students and so on. So by the time she made this exam piece, which is like a final test at at the Medway School, where she would have been 18, this was actually an examination piece, and we still have this. So you could call it the first roundel. Um, so she did this, and this is the piece that got her into the Royal College of Art. And then, so a teacher at the Royal College of Art was Dorothy Mahoney. Now it's spelt Mahoney, but uh, there are different pronunciations. I will just say Mahoney. Some people say Mahoney, but I'll just say we just always said Mahoney. So she, of course, had to criticize Sheila's work here. I think it's fantastic, but Dorothy did point out that you know you're obviously very skilled with a brush. These versal letters were done with a pointed brush, very painstakingly. We don't use a brush; we use a quill, you know, a hand cut quill. Uh, Also, your illustrations here, touching the lettering, we don't do that. Also, you seem to be confused between whether you want to make flat illustration or sort of figurative or dimensional illustration. You've got mixing of styles, but still, it's quite a piece for a 19-year-old. Of course, this style goes back to Edward Johnston, which some people call it Gothicized italic, but it's not really italic and it's not really Gothic, but it's kind of a pointed Gothic, really. So Edward Johnston was the teacher of Dorothy Mahoney and also Irene Wellington and many others, of course, but those two were very important teachers, Dorothy and Irene. This is from his book here. So just to mention a few names, you know, you can see some of Johnston's students included Grayley Hewitt, M.C. Oliver, who did a very powerful Gothicized italic or pointed hand, Dorothy, Anna Simmons, who did the translation into German of Johnston's book, which Gudrun and Hermann Zapf independently studied from, and in Irene Wellington. So I've put down, you know, Donald Jackson studied with M.C. Oliver and Irene Wellington, who also taught some other famous scribes, Anne Heckle, Joan Pillsbury, and so on. And Dorothy, her students, you can see there, Murray Angel, Anne Camp, and others. So it's a bit of a family tree here, but of course it misses out a lot of people. But those are some of the sort of the roots of where Sheila came from in terms of teachers. Some of Dorothy's work, you may not have seen much of it, but she did do a textbook late in life. In fact, she's used some of Sheila's uncial on the right page of that spread. There is a letter here to Alfred Fairbank from Dorothy, and I'll go into Alfred Fairbank a little bit in a minute. I always thought this example of hers at the top left was pretty modern. You know, people now are doing this kind of thing with alternating two styles, two weights, and so on. But it basically says their names and best wishes for Christmas and the New Year from Oak Cottage, Rootham, Kent. Easy to read, right? But that's Dorothy was a very important teacher, and I think in my case, whenever I would have discussions with Sheila, of course, over the decades on so many things, but sometimes it would be, well, should one do something this way or that way? And she often would say, well, I was taught such and so, meaning, her teaching came from Dorothy, which came from Edward Johnston. And I was always, she didn't really complain that I felt like I, I knew that, I knew what she was taught, but then I had to find my own way. And in some cases, you notice she was a stickler for people's penhold, but I've noticed people with crazy penholds that do amazing work, including a left-hander who wrote upside down, who was fantastic in one of the classes I taught. So, I was always a little bit more flexible, but Sheila was also not as inflexible as people sometimes think. Alfred Fairbank's important. He was a prolific author, and some of you may have some of his books, and you can still get a lot of these books secondhand. There is a story that during one of Dorothy's classes, he came into the room, and he was always dressed up people dressed in suits and ties back then a lot. He walked around the room and then just left. He never said anything, didn't say anything to the students. And then later he apparently told Dorothy that one, meaning Sheila, is a natural spacer. And when Dorothy told Sheila, she was just elated because at that time Fairbank was one of these kind of sort of legendary, unapproachable type of people. I have other stories about Alfred Fairbank, but uh, I'll I'll save them until afterwards, maybe. Just to mention, other Dorothy Mahoney students included Mary Angel and Anne Camp. Of course, most of us have Anne Camp's book. And it's kind of interesting that the last edition of Anne Camp's book was published in 2006, which was when the first edition of Sheila's textbook, Foundation of Calligraphy, was published. So it's kind of an interesting tie-in. I certainly studied Anne Camp's book a lot. And there may be a couple of people uh, in the crowd here that knew her. I never met her. I did meet others, including Mari and Heather Child and others. Um, and of course, Donald Jackson, I've known since I was a teenager. Um, so Irene Wellington, she was, I think, just a beloved calligrapher. Her work is so natural and beautiful, and so these are a couple of her things. You can still find this book that Heather and Anne and Donald put together about her life and work, and I would recommend it. It's not expensive. You can still find used copies out there. And yeah, Irene seconded the nomination of Sheila for what we now call a fellow of the Society of Scribes and Illuminators, SSI. But back then it was called a craft member. But so both Dorothy and Irene were backing Sheila for that. and she got it. This is a very famous piece. It's an opening. It's a double page spread. There's a lot going on, but it's so natural. See, I can appreciate this and learn from it, but I'm not trying to make my work like this as much as it's a little bit daunting when you see so much great work. And then you sort of like, well, what do I do? It's like, I have no idea. Just like everyone else did it so much better. So what's the point? But I think Donald told me once that, don't worry about finding your style. Just do the work, do a lot of work, and the style will just be there eventually. You can't force style. And of course, Anne Heckel was another famous student of Irene Wellington. And this is a fairly early piece of Anne's. But so there is Irene Wellington with Donald, a young Donald. I'm not sure. It could be 1960s. I'm not really sure. And of course, many lectures could be made on Donald's work and his, the team that produced the St. John's Bible. But for me, he was somebody that he came up about a decade after Sheila did. So I was aware of him while I was a child in the 60s. And it's a little bit similar to the age gap between myself and Christopher Hornis and Dennis Brown, that they are sort of a decade coming up after me. But we've stayed with Mabel and Donald a couple of times, and this was Sheila's last trip to England, so it capped off with a beautiful visit with them there. So I love this picture. So now I'm going to look at my father Peter's work, and Peter and Sheila met at the Royal College of Art, so they came from two different directions outside of London and met there. So I'm going to show a little clip. There will be, I think, 3 or 4 of these short clips. So I'm going to play this, and then I will stop it, and then we'll get back to that. So there's the lecture, and there's the clip. So please alert me if there's any problems with this. But this will be about 5 minutes, this first one, because this is from the DVD that the Swerdloffs made 20 years ago with Sheila talking about Peter's bindings.
Julian, the sound is really choppy. I'm not hearing the sound at all.
Oh, well, let's see how she sounds just talking. Maybe the music is bad, but hopefully she'll be okay talking. Okay, here she is.
I'm Sheila Waters. My professional life for the past 55 years has been in the lettering arts, specializing in calligraphy and illumination. But this informal video is not about me, but about some of the work of my late husband, Peter Waters.
How is her talking? How is the sound of that?
Her talking, her voice sounds fine.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's the important thing. So we'll carry on.
I was married to Peter Waters from 1953 to 2003, when he passed away at only 73. I've been asked to concentrate on his decorative bookbindings that he made before we immigrated to the United States in 1971 from England. This move was so that Peter could become Chief of Conservation at the Library of Congress. During 2 years prior to that, he had visited the Library of Congress about 10 times to design and set up a completely new department based on what he'd learned from his challenging experience after the November 1966 flood in Florence, Italy, where he'd found himself directing the setting up of a comprehensive restoration system in the National Library for nearly 200,000 badly damaged books, most of them printed before 1840. His work and his innovations there drew the attention of the Director for Preservation of the Library of Congress. And this move changed the direction of the lives of our family, but it also had much wider implications. Interns who received training in his department have become leaders themselves worldwide in what was then a new profession, that of library conservator. He has been called the father of American library conservation. Now, the question is, how does a person become capable of meeting a challenge like dealing with the damage caused to thousands of valuable books by the Florence flood and later setting up the leading center in the world for library conservation, especially when, before the flood, his experience was gained in a small, though prestigious, private bindery, designing and making beautiful commission bindings for collectors and repairing valuable manuscripts. This first half of his life's work is little known. Yet all he achieved later in the wider library world was based upon it. So it is his expertise in fine bookbinding that I'll talk about, and I'll show you the bindings that we still have in our family's possession. Peter began bookbinding at the Guildford College of Art when he was only 14. And one of his friends asked him if he'd like to go along to the bookbinding class on Saturday mornings to make portfolios. So he said, okay, I'll go along with you. And on his very first morning there, he upset the hot glue, the gelatine hot glue, all over the floor. Well, he was very shy at that time, and he was so embarrassed, but he spent the rest of the morning cleaning it up. Well, after everyone else had left, he finished cleaning it up, and as he was creeping out of the door, William Matthews, who was he was a very well-known binder himself at the time, and he said to him, "You coming next week, boy?" He was a pretty fierce teacher, and so Peter had felt that he didn't want to go back, but because he was asked in that tone, he rose to the challenge, and he thought, I'll go back, no matter what he thinks. I may have tipped over the glue, but I'm going back anyway. And of course, that changed his life completely. If he had not gone back, he'd have gone in for perhaps technical drawing or something like that. He certainly wouldn't have gone into bookbinding. And he became William Matthews' best student. And the bindings I have here are all the bindings that he made at Guildford under Matthews between the ages of 14, and that's this one. I'll show you them in detail afterwards. And all the ones that are sitting in the front here, right up to that far end, are ones he made at Guildford Art School. The ones behind further are from the Royal College of Art, and the ones at the back are much later bindings, and of course far more sophisticated and detailed, that were made for exhibitions. This was his very...
Okay, that's I'm going to just go forward to the next clip that we'll get to later on. Okay. Right. So here we go. Yeah. So and hopefully you can hear me again. So Peter went to he went to art school, and then he got into the Royal College of Art. And Peter actually had been sick as a child and missed quite a lot of school, and always felt he was behind. And he was a very shy boy. And his headmaster in school at some point told his father that Peter would never amount to anything because he wasn't bright enough. It's basically people were saying, oh, he should be out sweeping the streets and so on. So, when they got the letter that he was accepted at the Royal College of Art, Peter's father went down to the headmaster and shoved that letter in the guy's face and say, "Oh yeah, well," and the rest was history, because he rose to become really arguably the leading figure in his field at some point. So he was in art school and in Royal College of Art. He was extremely good at drawn lettering, and this is some of his drawn lettering. He was very good at indicating type, as we used to say. He was pretty bad at calligraphy, which balanced out Sheila, who was pretty bad at bookbinding. So between the two of them, they covered each other's weaknesses. So there we have them. Sheila graduated, but from the Royal College of Art, but Peter was awarded a free extra year, so he stayed on while she started to get freelance work and teach. Back when he was, this is pre Royal College of Art, when he's still in art school, Guildford College of Art. This book, and we have many of these bindings still. His teacher, William Matthews, did one tooled, this is all hand tooled in gold. His teacher did one side and he did the other, Peter, but nobody knows who did what. Peter was so good at such an early age, and he just went on from there. He was also good at Roman lettering, and of course, influenced by people like Eric Gill and others at the time. But he cut a whole alphabet in reverse in linoleum, and he cut it with a penknife. And Dorothy liked the alphabet so much. He was also a student of Dorothy Mahoney, as Sheila was also a student of Roger Powell in bookbinding. So Dorothy liked it so much, she had him do a series of prints of these letters, and she used them in her teaching. So he was known as being very good at Roman capitals. Of course, this is a long time before Edward Cattish, or before the idea that different brushstrokes influenced the form. So people were basically drawing Roman capitals at that point. This is an amazing thing to me. This is paper that's covering this book, but the paper is printed by from two pieces of linoleum that he hand cut. And so there's two printings that you can see here. One is to represent the cells, and the other is to represent the veins. And the amount of work that this took, it's just incredible. We don't have those linoleum pieces of linoleum anymore, but and now he would be at the Royal College of Art studying with the great Roger Powell, who, among other things, is famous for restoring and rebinding the Book of Kells, and which she'll talk about in a minute. This is Peter's binding that has a lot of blind stamping on it, and in this period, when Peter and Sheila started to work together and help each other with projects at the Royal College, and so here you're seeing many of their sketches that have been compiled there, just ideas for these sort of cartouche shapes. And this was the beginning of decades of collaborations that they did. We still have this binding, which was a test binding. The finished binding was purchased by the British Museum. So I'm going to have Sheila talk about that and a couple of other things. Let's see, this goes till, okay, 30.
One is the most important one he did while he was at the college. For an exhibition in 1951, November 1951, in Paris, called Le Livre Anglais, the English book. This was tracing the development of printed books right back from early times, and bindings in particular. And the earliest binding shown there was the Stonyhurst Gospel, which was bound in about the 6th century, I think. And this was probably the latest binding done specially for the exhibition. And Peter was 21 at the time, and he was asked to do a binding that would give a lead to young British binders and come up with a design that would be quite different from the masses of gold tooling that the French binders were renowned for, and lead in a different direction. And so he revived blind stamp binding. And if you look inside this book, this is called English Binding Before 1500. And of course, bindings then were blind stamps. There, in fact, is the Stonyhurst Gospel, the earliest known European binding. And that has a history for us too, because we got engaged because of that manuscript. It was thought to have been bound as a copy much later, about the 18th century. But he and Roger Powell, who was our tutor in binding and later became Peter later became his partner for 15 years because he was the best student Roger had ever had. And so in 1955, I think he became his partner. Anyway, that year, in November 51, he went to Manchester with Roger for 4 days to actually examine the Stonyhurst Gospel. They were asked to see if they could authenticate it as the earliest known European binding, and they did. By looking at the sewing and various things to do with the construction of it, they were able to prove that. And it was published later by the Oxford University Press, an article by the two of them, and photographs taken by Peter. And it was during that 4 days that we realized we missed each other. And we got engaged very soon after he returned from looking at that binding. Well, our lives seem to have been bound up with illuminated manuscripts because later, about, 2.5 years later, we got married 6 months before we were planning to because of the Book of Kells. Now, people always laugh at that. Well, how could that be? We were going to get married in the spring, but this was towards the end of Peter's 4th year at the Royal College of Art. And Roger Powell said to him, look, it's the end of the summer term. I have to go to Trinity College Library, Dublin, and restore and rebind the Book of Kells. And I'll be gone for 3 months. What about you two getting married right away and go down to the bindery in Petersfield and look after the bindery while I'm gone? So I gave my mother 5 weeks' notice for a white wedding, and we turned up the night before. And so we spent the next 3 months living in Roger's house, eating cream from the milk that was produced by his few cows, and digging fresh produce out of the ground. And we had a whale of a time in those early months while he was gone. So there we have two extremely important manuscripts, had a very, very powerful effect on our lives.
Okay, so go to the next one, which is way up here. This DVD still exists, but it's hard to find now. But it's called Peter Waters Master Bookbinder. And this will be what we'll look at later. All right, so I should mention that one of the things that attracted each other was music. Peter was a very good pianist, and as was his older brother, John. And Sheila sang. She grew up singing in church. And John's fiancée at the time, Margaret, my wonderful late Auntie Margaret, she actually went to the Royal College of Music. I forget. I think it's Royal College of Music. I don't think it's Royal School of Music, but she was a voice major. She was there at the same time as some famous guitarist Julian Bream and soprano Joan Sutherland. So she ended up being a music teacher in schools. But this was in our family a famous concert that they gave. which included Peter doing solo piano, he and John doing two piano works, for instance, Saint-Saëns and Liszt, and also Margaret and Sheila singing. So it's quite a concert. So there is Roger Powell, as I remember him. It's my photograph on the right on one of my visits back to England. And so Peter became his full partner in the firm and bookbinding. And so pretty soon Sheila started doing work for Roger, drawings that then would be made into designs that were part of bookbinding designs, either by tooling or by stamping. This is one of them. This is another one. I believe this is in the Bangkok Library at UC Berkeley now. This is a pretty amazing thing. If you can imagine, she wrote directly on the leather. And so that must be absolutely nerve-wracking. But she developed a technique to do that. And this is also another one that's at UC Berkeley. So this was the piece that it's usually not hanging off a bookcase, it's usually on the wall. But I think this was a piece that was one of her works that inspired me, especially to do that piece of white on black to give her. But she wrote this on leather. You can see a little bit of the leather grain, perhaps, but it's not calfskin vellum, it's leather. She, by the way, rarely used quills, hand-cut quills. She mostly used Mitchell steel nibs. So just to throw that out there. One of the, I'll get back to bindings in a minute, but one of her major projects in the 50s and 50s, late 50s, I guess, was the RAF Roll of Honor. And she did more of these names than any other scribe. I think she did over 30,000 names. But it was a great bread and butter job for her. And as she said here, it taught her a lot of things. It basically taught her how to be a professional scribe, how to get on with the work, how to pick it up and put it down, how to write rhythmically, and so on. All these scribes who worked on this had to follow Alfred Fairbank's model. And if you go to Letterform Archive, with my old friend Rob Saunders, he has some of the roughs that some of the scribes did to sort of propose that they should do this work, including Sheila's, and she proposed how title pages should be even. So back to Roger Powell and Peter Waters. This was a little book. They called it the trumpet book, but it's sort of like blowing your horn. In England, they said blowing your own trumpet. But it's such an elegant little book, especially the way the cover is. And Peter hand-bound all of these. There were 450 copies of this thing. And it shows in black and white photography a lot of their bindings. Mostly they did separate bindings. But Howard Nixon, who was the one who encouraged Peter that Sheila was talking about, he was at the British Museum, and he said that this partnership, along with Sheila, produced some of the most masterful and acclaimed collected designer bindings of the mid-20th century. So he was a big supporter of their work, a big sort of proponent. These are some of Sheila's drawings. Now, I will show you a few of her drawings that were turned into elements that were used on bindings. So these were some drawings. Then you can see more of them here. And then on the binding there, they're printed in blind across the bottom, that horizontal. And then you see this funny texture. These are actually letters. I don't know what this says, but it is a text. And in fact, if we go back to this, the text of this is actually a quote from Rudyard Kipling from the Just So stories. It's part of The Elephant's Child, So that's some sort of inside joke that they had there. Supposedly, you can read it by turning it at an angle. So we're going to, let's see, no, let's go to the next one. So Peter used this crazy compressed lettering on several bindings at the time. He did a number of bindings for a man named Major Abbey, and these were two other ones. That's to do with Chinese calligraphy on the right. All they had was black and white photography for a lot of these books, and they would finish them and have to send them off or deliver them to London or something. This one, if you ever get to go to the Wormsley Library in England, they have this book. This is King Lear. And these are two bindings that we still have here. So we welcome people to come and, I love to show and tell. This is maybe my favorite binding. If anyone ever sees this binding out there in the world, please let me know. I would scrape and sell stuff to try to buy this thing for our collection. I'm trying to keep the bindings all together so that they go to one museum at some point, but we're still trying to figure that out. But there you see all these blind stamped designs that Sheila would have drawn, and then they were made into zinc plates that were then pressed. They had a big letterpress, like a Washington standing press, and they would use that for these things. Rime of the Ancient Mariner. So most of their bindings were done as commissions or for exhibitions. So the ones that were for exhibitions or that something happened and it didn't sell or whatever, those are the bindings we still have, and including his student bindings. This was the DVD. I designed the cover for this. This is what you're seeing Sheila talking. That comes from this DVD. These are some of the drawings that she did for the Canterbury Tales, a binding that's attributed to both Roger and Peter. And in fact, up here, there is sort of a cipher, a monogram with all three of their initials, Roger Powell, Peter Waters, and Sheila Waters. But there are very few bindings that are attributed to all three. I mean, we know who did what. So, but a lot of the bindings went out just under the firm, the name Roger Powell and Peter Waters. This is something we still have. The final of this is at Chelmsford Cathedral, and I just think Sheila's drawings for this are just incredible. These are the original drawings for this. But, she started off as a child artist, and, she was a very skilled illustrator. I think most of us are pretty good at some aspects, but she was really well-rounded. She was really trained in graphic design and typography, as well as calligraphy and art and so on. So I just mentioned this. This was all going on while I was growing up. There we are on the top right. I'm not sure. I'm probably 13 or something there. My brother Mike or Michael, and then the youngest Christopher. At one point, Rona Jones came to work at the Slade Bindery, which was just down the road. She had a pony, so there's my cousin Sandra and my brother Chris on on Rona's pony there. When they came to move to Froxfield so that Peter would be working with Roger, Roger gave them the corner of one of his fields, and so they built what they called Cedar House on there. It started off as a smaller house, and then they gradually added bits to it after a few years. But there I am being carried by the stork. This would have been Christmas 1956, and I was born the next April. I just snapped this picture this morning from a rather damaged print, but Peter, when he had time, he would play on the local village cricket team. And for I think 1 or 2 years, he was actually the captain of that team. So villages would play each other. So that was something. I liked cricket when I was in school, but this was a scene that would be going on the weekend, I think on Sundays. And it's just part of village life that I appreciated. They were working so much all the time, but we did go on a summer holiday here and there. Sometimes it was a very rainy holiday in Scotland, and this was usually tent camping until we found a caravan, or I guess you'd call it a camper trailer. But I remember some very miserable rainy days in tents. But sometimes we also went to Devon by the seaside. So on the left, I'm the older boy there, and there's my brother Mike and our dog Suki, and with Sheila. So that's Chris. My brother Chris wasn't born then. There's another binding that Sheila's holding. Again, if you ever come here, you can examine these things if you have clean hands. We don't use gloves. We don't use white gloves because they can actually damage bindings and damage paper and so on. But hopefully that has changed a lot in museums. Now, this is something that people are really amazed by, and they did a number of these miniature chained libraries. And Sheila, I have a little clip of her showing one. I have one on the bookcase behind me, but it's better that she shows that. But these books are something like, I don't know, 5/8 of an inch tall. They're hand bound in leather, each one of them. So let's go to Sheila talking about this.
Miniature chained library. Peter made a lot of these, probably about 30. This was when work was in a quiet period where they hadn't got a great deal to do. I'll show you the top. See, there's that tiny tool again. That was on the primitive sculpture book. Rather similar colors as well. Now the top comes off, and it's a beautiful fit. The top comes off. You can see inside it's wood veneer. Then up comes deodorant stick light, a lectern. And inside the lectern are 7 miniature books, all on chains. The idea was taken from the famous Hereford Cathedral chained library in England, where manuscripts were actually chained to their shelves so that they couldn't be stolen. So this idea is you have to use tweezers to get these out. And you take out one of these little books. They're only 3/4 of an inch high. Peter covered all of these. There's a little symbol on each one. And Pamela Fowler did the illumination on this one, on all of these. Every book was different of all the 30 that were done. Exquisite detail. Pamela Fowler was Roger's assistant before Peter became his partner, and she continued to work there. I'll show you some of the others in here. These are all obviously ladies' headdresses and so on. And there'll be a little title page. There's a little title page. Exquisite work Pamela did. She was a good calligrapher.
Okay, isn't that amazing? Some of you may have been here and seen it, but it's really amazing that the work inside and so on. And she goes on a bit long on that, so we're not seeing the whole thing. But they each were actually bound in leather, which is amazing. So Peter did all the work except for the lectern, which Roger Powell made. We'll get back to that. So we're getting towards, yeah. Just going back to the early 50s, well, mid to late 50s here. So they usually did some sort of New Year card or Christmas card. These are some of the early ones. This was a job, it was commissioned by Philip Hofer at Harvard at the Houghton Library. And there is a story about this, but which I can go into later. But we have these back now because they were somehow the package was never opened, what she sent, and they never paid for them. And then at some point she asked, what happened? And they were all embarrassed. And they found the original mailing package, and these things were still inside it. And so they rather sheepishly sent them all back. And so they weren't paid for, so Sheila got them back. But it was a whole set of these wildflowers that she based on local, just going for walks and finding wildflowers. This is something that Carl Roars has put into the Speedball book. But this is kind of amazing to think that this was back in the late 1950s, that Sheila was thinking on the left side there, thinking very analytically about different kinds of italic, what you could do to alter things to do with pen angle, slope, spacing, letter width, and so on. And so when she was asked to do a Shakespeare sonnet for Richard Harrison, she took one sonnet and did 10 different styles of italic going down the page. So, and then later on, of course, she expanded this in her book and elsewhere in her teaching. Of course, the major manuscript book that she did was Under Milk Wood by Dylan Thomas. She did start it in England, and she got a fair way on it, but there was always other jobs to go on, so it spent most of its time in the drawers. And she eventually finished it 17 years later in this country. I think it was a commission, and Edward Hornby was going to reach a certain age, and he said if he didn't see it soon, he might start to lose interest. So she did hurry up and finish. So she did more of the work in this country, but some of the sketches and so on go all the way back to, well, particularly the 60s. These are some of the pages. There was a reproduction book made, which is very difficult to find now. The publisher's son is kind of hoarding these and hanging on to them and putting a ridiculous price on them. So it's like we can't buy them anymore. It's kind of crazy. It's another story. So her one of the groundbreaking things was how she really revived Carolingian and made her own version of it. And it really wasn't a style that scribes used back in the 50s and 60s. And of course, she's taught that to many people. In the Speedball book, Carl, in the current one, Carl asked me to do my own version of Carolingian. And to be honest, I don't really use Carolingian that much. I used to maybe when I was starting, but so I thought, well, I couldn't wriggle out of it. He was very encouraging. So I thought, well, the Speedball book normally doesn't show historical study. So I did a little bit of a copying of a manuscript or a photocopy. So the top left there shows some of that. And then he wanted me to go in a different direction, to show my take on it. It's not really what I would use necessarily, but it's just a different version. It's different kinds of serifs and so on. But, it doesn't have the sort of flow that Sheila's has, but it's just, I'm trying to make Carl happy basically, but so it's a little bit, it was a bit of a challenge to come up with something because Sheila's work, and, I had this problem or challenge early on because her take on styles is so convincing. What she does, it's hard to get away from that. So, but I've spent my whole career kind of getting away from it and coming back to it all the time. Maps were very important. What I remember as a child, more than anything in her work, was her working on maps, maps for publishers, such as wine regions of different countries. These would all have been done black on white, and in some cases there would be color separations. Remember, this is 1960s. She didn't use a light table. She could have done, but obviously there's no scanning, no computers. And so I go back to this image. She was so busy, and I think some of her students got the idea that she actually put herself in the kids' playpen and was able to work. It's not quite true. She took the kids' playpen, opened it out, and barricaded herself into a corner to work. So that's more what happened. But I remember, well, she also sent Mike and me off to boarding school, so she'd have more chance to work. I did come home for like a day and a half on the weekend, so I wasn't strictly boarding. The biggest map job that I think anybody has ever done, maybe, certainly for Sheila, was these 73 maps and diagrams for this one book. Can you imagine? I mean, if any of us have done one map, they're very challenging things to do. I've done 2 that I can remember, but she did 73 just for one book. So working backwards, on the right, there's how it was printed in the book with 2 colors. And on the left, you're seeing actually the 2 originals. It's a color separation. So she worked on this frosted mylar. And so you could prepare it with Sandorak, and then you could, to give it a grip. And so some of us use Sandorak. Going backwards, they would have started with a lot of these sketches, and she had to work back and forth with the author, David Chandler. She did make some notes much later on about her process, and I transcribed that. I won't go into it, but she always, as my father did with his bindings, they really used a lot of planning so that things would fall into place, if they went through the steps. She didn't just sit down and dash something off ever, really.
Could I interrupt for just a second, Julian?
Hey, Carl, yes.
One of my favorite things about this is that she designed a different compass rose for every single 73 maps, that all of those compass roses are different.
Right. Thanks, Carl. That's one of those 100 things that I am neglecting to say. But yeah, it is amazing. One of the things, Letraset was just starting back then, and you could draw symbols and then have them reproduced, and then you could just stick them down. So some of these things, like the little, I don't know, there was the little symbols for different things, like little cross swords and so on, that she made multiples of. But this stuff, this frosted mylar, there's a certain technique to use on that. And she used Sandorak, this finely ground Sandorak that's then rubbed into the surface of the paper very sparingly, but it does help give your nib a grip. But also as we know, you can affect the ink flow with changing things on your pen. You can also use different slopes from flat to very steep. And other factors, it's a whole alchemy of different elements. These are 2 of the originals for these maps, so they're quite large. But I know my friend Tamara Stoneburner, who's a good calligrapher, she said she learned more about italic by studying Sheila's maps than from any other source, which, so that speaks. But they are amazing. And I think the more the years go on, and I look at some of these things, it's just more and more incredible. The precision. We're not looking at them very, very close up, but if you were to look at her italic, there's almost no serif. They're really pared down to very, very essential forms. Now this, if those of you in San Francisco, you can go and look at this piece at the Harrison collection, and it's one of the pieces that is a real joint effort between my parents. So my father did all the gold, the tooling, and the leather work. So it's to me, it's just another incredible work. I'd like to go out there and just spend some time looking at this. These were some of her trials, and I think they have these out there too. So you can see she's drawing these vertical lines to try to find some alignments rather than just writing it out as she would have seen it in a book. She's trying to make each page work, with a slightly different flow. So yeah, that's, and then this is all raised gold for these three men superimposed. Some other, and also the text is written twice. There's a faint echo written in this light color as well. This condensed lettering here, it's basically just saying that T.S. Eliot wrote it and when it was done and so on. It's like 1925. If you know how to read this, it actually says something. But
I have the copy here, Julian. I could read it real quick.
Okay.
It says, in memory of T.S. Eliot, died January 1965, The Hollow Men, 1925.
That's easy to read, right?
If you drive up on it like it's a stop sign painted on the street.
Yes. So, yeah, it's incredible. So I think there are some people out there who may have been to the Harrison collection but haven't seen it. So I would encourage you to check it out. So we're coming to the end here, which, the Florence flood, which happened in late 1966, it really changed our lives eventually. It eventually led to us moving over here. But so, this presentation has been about their work mostly in the 1950s and 1960s. And my father was mostly doing these designer bookbindings, but he and Roger were moving more and more into working on old manuscripts, some of these old so-called Celtic manuscripts, the Book of Armagh, Book of Dimmer, and so on. And Roger worked on the Book of Kells. He bound it into 4 volumes, for one thing. But so I grew up actually being able to see some of this work going on. So Sheila talks about being able to see actual manuscripts taken apart. And I did to some extent. I would go down on my bicycle. It was only a quarter of a mile away. They would measure me on the wall to see how I'm growing, to put the mark on the wall. I might give Roger a fossil that I'd found that he would keep for decades after that. And then I'd see what they're working on. So it was really, I guess I thought it was somewhat normal, but I'm sure I knew as, other kids didn't have this experience. But the Florence flood devastated, well, it was flooding Venice as well, of course, and all surrounding areas. But Peter was asked actually by Howard Nixon, the same Howard Nixon that had written the introduction to their little portfolio book. But Peter was asked to go out there with two colleagues, Dorothy Cumsty and Tony Keynes. They went out and sort of had to stop the work that was being done and then come up with systems of how to deal with these things. So this picture on the left, the pattern you see on the ceiling there, that's made by books that were forced up to the ceiling by all this muck. It's not just water, of course. It's sewage, it's petroleum, it's all kinds of nasty stuff. And you may have heard of the term mud angels. To me, the mud angels were the students who carried the books, all the muddy books, out literally to the street, and they had to be dealt with from there. But they had to come up with systems to deal with these books en masse, as Sheila talks about in the last clip. Even to do with making their own drying systems. So that is Sandy Cockrell there on the top left, making drying racks with fishing netting. Sheila was out in Florence, not as much as Peter, but she went out there and she did drawings that were made into, that were fabricated and made into furniture. And for instance, these things, these are jacketed sinks so that you could control the temperature of the liquid. And so they had to devise systems where books would be totally taken apart and treated leaf by leaf. The whole of the reading room of the library was turned into workshops. Peter designed all of the workstations, the drawers, the benches, and so on. Some of the other people include Chris Clarkson, Don Etherington, and others. Stella Patry, who is from San Francisco. Chris Clarkson had been a student of Peter's at the Royal College of Art when he succeeded Roger Powell. Don Etherington, as well as Chris Clarkson, had worked at the Slade Bindery. A number of people came and went there, and so everyone knew each other. A very talented binder, George Kirkpatrick, I remember. He may be still around, but he was an extremely talented guy. So anyway, this experience, there's some of the damaged books. The books that survived best were the early printed books printed on really good paper, of course. Anything with vellum or leather had to be, the covers had to be replaced. But they learned an awful lot about historical sewing structures apart from anything else. So I think Sheila mentions this. There they are working. She's working on this card. Well, first of all, there's myself and my brother. I was 10, he was 7. Young Christopher was too young to come along on that. We spent 9 weeks in Florence while my parents were working there. It was a brutally hot summer. And of the 9 weeks we were there, we had 2 days of 9 weeks where we actually we went to the beach on one day, and then we went to a swimming pool on the other day, out of 9 weeks. Otherwise, we had to, for half of the time, we actually went into the library while they were working. We had to just amuse ourselves. I remember there was an electrician at the library that we nicknamed Sparks. Anyway, Sheila's working on this card that then, and it was also done in Italian so that the person evaluating a book of what needed to be done could just check the things that need to be treated. And then that would be put with the book. And so then later on, when people came to that book to work on, they knew what to do. So you wouldn't have to evaluate each book and work on it. They were already lining the books up. And there were over 100,000 of these rare books to be treated. There was the film made by, actually it was the Roger Hill of the Royal College of Art. And there's Sheila's invitation to see that film. We made a DVD of the film that is included with every copy of Waters Rising, which I helped produce back in 2016 for the 50th anniversary of the flood. And it contains all the letters going back and forth. Peter wrote like a daily diary, really, in these letters of what was happening daily. So it's really it's a 500-page book, and I designed it. I remember I was teaching in Bruges, and I had a bad back, and I was lying on my back after class, designing the cover of this book in Bruges on my laptop. So that's always something to remember. But I eventually bought all the remaining copies from the publisher because they had some accident where they lost a few hundred of the books. So I have like the last 30 copies, I guess. So we will just go to this, and this will be sort of to wrap it up.
What we've been seeing is what Peter did before the Great Flood in Florence in 1966. After that, he did very little binding because he was totally wrapped up in the needs of that disaster and a research program that was set up after that, and then, of course, preparing to come to the Library of Congress. And so life was never the same again, and very, very little binding was done. And some people have asked why, I mean, didn't he miss doing those bindings? What a shame to stop doing beautiful bindings like this. And he said that Florence had given him such a wider experience that what a waste it would be if he just dropped all that and went back to producing pretty bindings. And he knew that that experience had changed his whole approach to his work, and that conservation then became the really creative force for him of thinking about books on a far wider scale. It was in fact his work with Roger and their approach to the book as a whole entity, and the work they did together on damaged manuscripts, valuable manuscripts. For example, Roger worked on the Book of Kells and not Peter, but after that, the books of Darrow, Dimmer, and Armagh, the old manuscripts of Trinity College Library, the Book of Chad that's in Lichfield Cathedral, which is contemporary with Kells, they all came into their workshops to be repaired and rebound. I could walk down the road 1/4 mile and see the Book of Chad, those beautiful half uncials, lying in sheets instead of in a bound book, anytime I liked during the few months that it was down there. So I was able to see valuable manuscripts in their bindery on many occasions. And it was his work with those that taught him so much, that fitted him really for what he later did. And another thing is that because he had an art background and a really rich art background of many years at art school, art college, it gave him a different point of view. It enabled him to think sideways, so to speak, and meet library problems in a way that librarians wouldn't normally come up with. So he was able to apply his creativity, his design sense, his innovations and so on to a mass need and not just individual books, and yet trying to retain the standards that he'd always applied for the one-off problems to mass problems, and that was where the difficulty was. When he came to the Library of Congress, for example, he had to change the thinking of the curators there from thinking of sending individual damaged books down to the then small bindery just for repair, to changing their attitude completely to one of what he termed phased conservation. And that was thinking of books as a whole lot that needed to have the rot stopped, so to speak. So climate control and things like that became very important. And he managed over the next couple of years, I think, to finally persuade the curators of the library that that is the approach they should take. And it went on from there. But as I say, the story of what he did in the Library of Congress is another one, and an equally lengthy one. But because I was so involved with the design and the drawings and so forth that produced those bindings, it's been a great pleasure for me to just dig them all out again and talk about them and think of what that period of our lives meant. I feel I was very privileged to have been married for so long to a very great man. And this year, I think, is Peter's year, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I feel the same that Peter was a great man. And Sheila was. I mean, they're two remarkable people. Um, can you hear me? Okay, now I'm just wrapping it up now.
Yeah, I can hear you
Okay.
fine.
Okay. Good. Yeah. So this was for me starting off when I decided to go into calligraphy. It's a lot to live up to. So you're either it either sort of breaks you, or you have to somehow overcome that. Trying to rise up to their sorts of standards, which was really quite daunting. But I think not trying to follow what either of them did is exactly because I think that was good for me. But I Kathy and I live in the house where Sheila died in 2022. So I have a big responsibility here to take care of things and to make sure things go to safe places. I did. I thought it was kind of interesting that if the number six, the year six, we're in 2026, and if you go back, there are some interesting, important things that happened on the sixes. Some of them, and I probably missed out some, but 1896, Roger Powell was born. Edward Johnston's book, 1906. 1946, the war had ended and Peter and Sheila go off to art school. 1956, the Powell and Waters partnership starts, and I was apparently on the way in 1956 and born in April the following year. 1966 was the Florence flood. 1976, the Washington Calligraphers Guild was founded, but then we were slow compared to the Friends of Calligraphy and the New York group and the LA group and so on. But 2006, Sheila's book was first published and other things. And that video was produced in 2006. 2016, now we're at the 50th anniversary of the Florence flood, 10 years ago. And Sheila and I gave lectures about that whole thing around the country. And I've been asked to do a similar lecture for the University of Delaware on the 60th anniversary. I assured them I'm not a conservative, but I did live through it and I have a lot of material. And then here we are to this time. And one of the things that I was working on was Sheila's book to be published in Japanese. So I was working a lot with Takako Takigawa, who's married also to John Stevens. You may know her. She's a fantastic calligrapher herself, but she's really an amazing person, so detail oriented. So that book has been published, and I have it. I don't think you can buy it here, but these are two of my designs. The letterform conference logo I did back in 1988, and then for this year I did this circular thing for the 50th anniversary of the Calligraphers Guild. I mentioned this, but we 5 years before Sheila's death, Kathy and I sold our house and we moved in with Sheila. And this house works very well because it's got two levels. She even has our old kitchen in the basement that she used. But more and more, she needed a lot of care. She was mentally great the whole way, but physically, she had a lot of problems. Very, very difficult to do certain things. So I think we all did the right thing. Previously, Kathy and I had housed Kathy's father in his 90s. That was at our house in Gaithersburg. But we do like to have visitors and to look at things, and I think I like that a lot to share. So please come visit. So I'd like to thank you all, and to mention that the part 2 will be in October. Again, thanks to the Swerdloffs for producing that video, and especially to Raoul. I think what you provide, you're very generous to do this for these brunches, and people should go check out the other recordings on the channel. So I hope you'll all do that. So I'm going to now stop the share and get back to the people. I see some of you are still there. So
It was an honor to have you give this presentation for us. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Julian.
thanks for the opportunity. I'm glad we got through it. So
you see there were some questions about quite a few questions. Michael Starkman appreciates your fonts.
I think I'll switch to. I'm just switching my view to whoever's talking. Well, that's you.
There were some other questions, but I can't find them.
We can all unmute ourselves. And
any questions for Julian?
When I gave this, well, a similar, not the same, but a similar talk to the Washington Calligraphers Guild, John Stevens and Takako were in the group, and once I got John started, then he did talk a lot. So we were going, but a lot. Most people just kept quiet while he was talking, so that was kind of funny. But
excuse me, Sarah, go ahead. Can you unmute yourself? You have a question?
Sure. Hi, this is Sarah. Thank you so much for your talk. It was wonderful. And I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area a bit after this, but I then moved away to Cambridge, Massachusetts. But I started doing calligraphy as a girl at the National Cathedral School. And so I'm so interested to know about the Washington Calligraphers Guild and what kinds of things do they do now, and a little bit about their history, but that may be too big of a topic, maybe. But
yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit removed. I was one of the people who started it when I was like 19 years old, but we were following other groups at the time, including Friends of Calligraphy, including Society of Scribes in New York, and it was Sheila and just a few students. And I remember there was a meeting of just 12 of us, first of all. And interesting thing to me, it was 6 men and 6 women in that meeting. There's sixes again, so I don't know what that's about. But I mean, I guess the Calligraphers Guild has tried to do what Friends of Calligraphy have done, produce a journal, sponsor lectures and workshops and, events and publications. And same with Society of Scribes. I'm not the best spokesman for, Sheila was the first president a long time ago of the Calligraphers Guild. They do a journal, but it tends to be designed and edited by different people. Carl Rohr's Alphabet Journal for Friends of Calligraphy is by far the greatest piece of work I think ever done in any journal on calligraphy. It's just, I'm a member because of that, because of Carl. So,
so the Washington Cathedral is obviously not a medieval cathedral, but it has a lot of medieval aspects. And growing up, we studied a lot of medieval things, and of course, calligraphy isn't necessarily medieval either. But I'm just interested to know if your recollection, if there was anyone ever involved from the National Cathedral.
I don't know, to be honest. My only connection is that I do the diplomas for the cathedral for the St. Albans School every year. So that's
All my brothers went to school.
yeah, maybe he has one of mine. Well, I don't know. Maybe that was probably before my time. I've been doing that for 12 years or something, but I really don't know what yeah, if they have any calligraphy going on. So yeah,
All right. Well, thanks.
thanks.
Did anyone else have questions for Julian?
Or comments or anything,
Can I say something?
please.
This cylinder box, which you took the lid off, and these miniature books, it was extremely beautiful. Were they, yeah, were your parents, either of them or both, making more of these kind of playful little machine? It's almost a machine because you were pushing up the inside.
Yes. I don't know who had the idea for this, but they didn't make all kinds of different things. They just did, I think, about 30 of these. They were all different in terms of the colors and the tooling and so on. Each one is different. And Mari Angel did some of the insides of the books, and she's well known for her miniatures. And Sheila did quite a number of them, and they were all on different themes. And then Pamela Fowler, who was a good artist, as Sheila said, she was Roger Powell's assistant. But so we only have this one, but I'm very happy that we have it. I actually got this from one of Roger Powell's daughters years ago. So otherwise we wouldn't have any. But yeah, it's a bit scary to even handle them because they're so tiny. And Sheila did a great job, with her tiny fingers. The only other they did do some things like these napkin rings because they would have scraps of leather, and so that they would make them. And I think they were being sold in London in a shop as if they were made in Italy. You think they were advertising them or selling them as if they were Italian, and they were so popular that instead of using scraps of leather to make these, they actually started to buy leather especially to make these things. So they made a lot of these napkin rings.
Huh.
And there are a couple where it has the children's initials. So I have a JW on there in another box. But the cockerel marbling is quite famous, and that's what they use to cover these boxes. I still have just some empty boxes as well. So yeah, they didn't do all kinds of crazy things. They were mostly so busy with commissions. Yeah. So
Thank you.
thanks. Yeah.
Barbara
Yes.
DeMaria, you had a question?
No, not a question. I wanted to just tell Peter, excuse me, Julian, that
That's okay.
I read the book probably 9 years ago, Waters Rising. What impressed me at the time, it was actually an anniversary gift. The book was an anniversary gift from my husband to me. And I was so taken by the fact that it almost reads like a marriage manual. How to have a really,
Yeah.
it's just it was so such an insight into this relationship between these two people, and it really there's a lot of advice in there, not given as advice so much, but just if you read between the lines, they had a great marriage.
Yes, and it was an unusual marriage, and of course it had its ups and downs, as like any marriage. And there were times when we thought maybe they would split up because usually it was arguing over the kids, especially when we were teenagers. And it got to be really serious. And my poor father, this mostly after we moved to this country, he had to work at the Library of Congress. It was a long commute. There was a lot of pressure on him, and he really felt things. He had a very strong sense of ethics and what's right, what's wrong. Everything, you tell the truth. You don't go behind people's backs. You don't, all of these things. And if something was not done to his high standards, he'd get really upset about it. And you don't see that side of people. It's sort of a double-edged sword. So I'm left with that them as an example in many ways, but also it's an example of the good and maybe the not so good in a relationship. They sent me off to boarding school, and I hated it, but they did what they thought was right at the time. So but that the letters in Waters Rising between them, it's printed without any cuts. There's nothing cut out because it's too personal. And there's a few things that are said that probably Peter Peter probably wouldn't like the idea that it's out in public, but it is. So um, it, I remember even something like there's an English furniture brand called Urquhart. So we have a couple of the Urquhart chairs. Well, it's a two-seater and a chair. They lost their cushions and they're sort of like shells now. But somewhere in those letters, Sheila says that she bought the two-seater as a special thing so that when he's back home, they can sit and watch television together in this two-seater Urquhart. And this thing's almost on the floor. It's so low. As we get older, doesn't the furniture get lower and lower? It's like, how to get out of this thing? But it was kind of so touching. And now Urquhart is considered a classic. It's one of those. It's a classic British furniture design. But the TV they were watching, I think, had about a 5-inch black and white screen. So, but yeah, there's a lot of. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
John,
Yeah, thank you, Julian. That was a wonderful
Thanks.
presentation.
Great to see you.
I'll just add that about a year ago, I got the San Francisco Public Library's shelf copy of The Wars of Napoleon, and I scanned every single map.
You could have
But
asked
that's
me.
not my.
I might have an extra copy.
Oh, no, you can buy them on eBay.
Yes,
But
yes, you can.
yeah, I prefer to, just check them out when I can. Um, Surprising things on the shelves. I do have a question, and this may be common knowledge. What became of the original of Edward Hornby's Dylan Thomas manuscript that Sheila did?
Right, under Milkwood. So
Under Milkwood, thank you.
she did finish it, and I think she finished it in like 1978 or so, and went over and delivered it to Hornby. And then at a certain point, he had a sick relative, and he felt he needed to sell some things, so he sold that to the Wormsley Library, which is the Paul Getty's. Well, now it's what the son, forget the Getty name. Um, anyway, this is big Getty estate, and they have a whole cricket ground on the estate, and they have a whole opera house, and they have this amazing library, and they have some great bindings there. They have other bindings of my father's. They have a Caxton Chaucer, they bought for like 6 million. It's a major collection. So that's in there. And apparently the original Getty really liked that manuscript. And I've been there, and you could make an appointment and go there to see their stuff. They have original manuscripts of Esther Inglis. If you don't know English, she was an amazing, I think, somewhere around 1600, she was working. She was a Scottish woman who did remarkable, tiny, tiny calligraphy. There's a facsimile of one of the books that they published of hers. So, I mean, just to name a couple, but it's the Wormsley Library. I forget exactly where it is, but you can go there, I think. I'm
I
not
did
sure.
visit I did visit Hornby and was able
Ah,
to look at Undermilk with the original. I'll
well,
never
that must
forget
have
it.
been in the 70s then,
It
right?
was in the 70s. Sue Cavendish took me.
Nice.
He also collected Inrow. He had an amazing collection of art.
Huh.
Yeah.
He wrote a book, and I forget, it was just sort of personal recollections, I think. And I have it in the drawer with a lot of the preliminary material that Sheila did, her roughs and so on. And I have that book. And there's a section in there about this manuscript. But yeah, he sold it for a big profit. But it's in a good place, I think. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Any other questions? Any other questions for Julian or comments?
No, not a question. Just thank you very much, Julian. It was a lovely reminder of the time that Jeff and I had with Sheila, and seen so many of the things that you've shown, and to be able to just sit in her studio and look at them on my own was just such a privilege and a very precious time. So thank you. And
Oh,
I'm looking
thanks.
forward to part two.
She loved you being here, I know, and yeah, that was an era where people could come and stay and
Mm,
study. And when she was getting on a bit, I started co-teaching with her these master classes. I mean, they were always her thing, and we kept them going as long as possible. And then COVID hit, and that basically stopped everything. And by the time that things started to lift, she was really getting past, she it would
mm,
be more like she'd have to sit somewhere, people would have to come to her, and it wasn't, and I'd be trying
at
to
the same
multitask
time.
with meals
Mm,
and helping people. And so, but I know some people have great memories of being here, and the place is still pretty similar, but the downstairs there's a lot that is organized, but I'm I want to make sure things go to the right places so that they'll
yeah.
be taken care of and also accessible for people to be able to look at stuff. I think it's a bit of a problem, a challenge for all of us. Like, what do we do with our stuff?
Yeah. Mm. What
Um,
tickled me more than anything was finding a copy of my book of illuminated letters on her bookshelf.
oh yeah, I mean,
And
that's
she
nuts.
used it, which was even more amazing.
Well, I
Mm.
don't know. She she liked buying stuff,
Yeah.
including
Don't we
books.
all?
But yeah, well, the silly thing is, for all the years we were living in different separate houses, we'd end up buying the same book. So you have at least two copies of everything, if not four copies.
Duplicates, yeah.
So it's a bit. And I've been much more of a book collector than she was. We do have manuscript pages and early printed things. I have pages from the Nuremberg Chronicles, and I even have a copy of the Teuerdank, which is a very important book from 15 set. Well, my printing is 1519. That's a whole other lecture. But
Mm.
uh, some of these things need to be sold, some of them. But the stuff of my parents, especially, they need to go somewhere where they can still be seen. I don't,
Yeah.
I
Proper
could be selling
collection.
my father's bindings, but I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that. I want to
No.
keep them together.
Mm.
I know a couple of people who have a binding of my dad's, and I'd love to get a hold of those and
Yeah.
get more of them together. But those people will not, they
Mm.
won't sell those. We don't have unlimited funds either, but you know, um, it's Sheila did this quote, this Erasmus quote, I guess, of when I have a little money, I buy books, and then if there's any left over, I buy clothes and food and clothes or something like that. Sometimes it has felt that way.
Mm.
Yeah. But if we have some notice, we certainly like people to visit. Carl was here for several days. We've had people, and I think I actually prefer that to have somebody or maybe a group of two or three visiting, as opposed to putting on these full-blown workshops with all the meals and everything else for a dozen people. I think that was Sheila's thing. She went through different phases with classes. She was such a prolific, such a naturally outgoing person, and the extrovert that gets energy from people, rather than some of us who sort of get our energy drained from being around a lot of people. So there's some balance. We're all a bit of a mixture, I guess. So I know one of my dear friends who's a prolific Zoom teacher now. I think the whole switching to Zoom was perfect for her because she didn't really like to be with people. It was like always a struggle or an energy thing. And now, with Zoom, it's a little easier. But I think there's nothing like being in person and, using the student's pen, instead of sitting and demonstrating and, having people just watch. I'm not a fan of that, really. I don't know. Do you do much Zoom teaching, Margaret? Or do you do more in
I have
person?
I've done quite a lot,
Yeah.
both in the UK and abroad as well. So,
Yeah.
but I've backed off from a lot of it because I found it was so time consuming for just a couple of hours maybe, and you never knew if they were actually doing any work afterwards.
Yes.
You couldn't see what they got up to in the meantime.
Right. I
But
don't
I've
know.
been doing some bookbinding instead. I mean, nothing like your father's, but only really for soft binding so far. But the hard stuff comes later this year. I'll keep you posted.
So is this like a non-adhesive bindings or just
Most of them have been non-adhesive, cross-structured bindings, and which I've just got to the end of the first stage, but it's really for assessment, except they did it two ways. You could either do it for a special skills award, but I wasn't interested in doing that, having done one myself on design. I know how much work's involved, so I'm just doing it for my own interest and because I never had a chance to do any before. Well, not much anyway. And so I'm having fun, whereas the others are beating themselves up. They can't keep up with the schedule, so I win.
great? Yeah, the binding was something that I only ever did in a very, very simple way, small structures. Because I mean, when you've got a parent who's like the best,
You
it's
can't
just
compete,
too
can you?
much. It's enough to try to do good lettering.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah,
this was really just for um, displaying calligraphy in book form rather than
yeah.
framed, and it required no special kit like sewing cradles and
Oh, okay.
whatnot. Just basic. So, I mean, the person who's been teaching us said she's a lousy sewer and she has to check measurements and folds every time, and she's not the only one, before she can actually do something. I mean, it took me about 6 weeks actually to get as far as finishing the cross structure binding with the straps around because I kept making mistakes. So, but I've done it now. So big tick. The sewing is actually quite easy by comparison, but that's another story. Anyway,
In the Waters Rising book, the DVD that comes, the 1968 film, it does
uh-huh.
show Chris Clarkson making a limp vellum binding, and then it shows my father Peter making a leather binding. Now these are conservation bindings. They're not decorative,
Mm-hmm.
and the deftness, the speed, the skill is incredible. And
Yeah.
you don't ever see their faces, but Chris Clarkson had rather fat fingers. My father had long fingers and hairy forearms, so you can always tell the difference. But it's the film is called something like The Restoration of Books, Florence, 1968. Some of the footage was actually made in Froxfield in England. Some of it was from Florence, but that's the only footage we have of my father doing any sort of binding. But it's
Yeah, amazing.
the speed and the precision is incredible.
I'm not deft yet.
So
I'm working on it, but it's an acquired skill, and watching a practiced pair of hands doing it is just awesome in the correct sense of the word.
yeah, well, it's great to keep learning things. It's a lot easier to learn some some stuff when you're younger, but you
Yeah.
also it helps to have some experience to bring to learning as well. So that's a
Mm,
balance maybe.
yeah.
So
So
um
thanks
yeah.
very much.
Oh, thanks. So
Many of us remember your mother and have taken classes from Sheila, including me. Thank you. It was nice to remember her and to see the interviews of her.
well,
So
also I think it's nice to hear her talking. She's not talking about calligraphy so much, but that whole period before we came to this country, I tried to give a picture of what it was like because it wasn't her just doing her calligraphy. And I was, well, she was doing work for the bindings and she was being paid, I think, as a subcontractor, like doing freelance work. So in some cases, she was being paid more than my father was because there was a period where they were never charging nearly enough. There was a period where he took over the teaching at the Royal College of Art that Roger Powell had to retire at 60. Now, many of us would be long retired, if that's the case. That's pretty horrendous. But he had to take over that teaching, and so the money he earned from one day of teaching at the Royal College, he had to turn that money back into the firm. So he almost was making nothing. So if he had kept that money and just laid in bed the rest of the week, he would have been making more than he was at a certain period. So actually, when Florence came around, there was some funding, which I think some of the conservators did get paid. And so it was probably a little bit more steady money, ironically, than when they were in private practice, which is odd. But yeah, he did two bindings for me, which was pretty special for me. One was a book of donors for the National Gallery that I did. If you give at a certain level, you get your name in a book. If you give at a much bigger level, you get your name put on the building. And so this was a certain level of donorship. And then also my manuscript of Fern Hill by Dylan Thomas, he bound that, and that is at the Carey collection at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology. They have that book up there. So that he did very little binding once we came over here because he was so busy with disasters. He did a lot of consulting in other libraries around the world. So yeah, and he died in his early 70s from mesothelioma, which is to do with this asbestos exposure. So that's really it's a cautionary tale. They didn't know back in the late 50s what airborne he was turning uh, asbestos handles that they changed their wooden handles on tooling for tooling to asbestos, and other binderies were doing this. And so somebody is doing some research, like how many binderies did this and how many people got sick because of it. But mesothelioma doesn't rear itself and kill somebody for decades. So it happened to him, and it was high exposure of airborne particles from several decades earlier. So, yeah, he was cut short, unfortunately. But we shouldn't end on that note.
Anyway, thank you again, Julian. This is fabulous.
Thank you.
Part two, I wanted to mention that there will be a second part of this talk, part two of Julian's talk, which will focus on the Waters time in the United States, will be on October 18th in the Blackletter Brunch of October 18th. The next Blackletter Brunch will be on Sunday, September 13th at 10 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Oliver Hoffman will talk about his father, Detroit calligrapher and graphic designer Lothar Hoffman. So I'll see you then. Thank you so much to everybody. You take
Thank you.
Thank you, Raul.
Bye-bye.
Thanks everybody.
Raul.
Thank
Great
you.
to see you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.